What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Scales 13. In today's video, me and Panther here are going to explain to you guys what not to do with your blue-tongued skink. Basically, what we're going to do is highlight some common mistakes made in blue-tongued skink keeping, and we're going to give you some tips to keep your blue-tongued skink healthy and happy. Alright guys, so the first thing you don't want to do when it comes to keeping blue-tongued skinks is give them the wrong humidity range. Now this all depends on the species you're keeping. So it's very important to know what exact species of blue-tongued skink you have, so that way you can give them the proper humidity. Now, Panther here is a common Indonesian blue-tongued skink, Taliqua gigas gigas. So this guy actually needs high humidity because he's from a tropical area, where animals such as northern blue-tongued skinks can tolerate a wider range of humidity, and then some of the other species of Australian blue-tongued skinks actually prefer it drier. So for this guy, I provide 60 to 90% humidity for his enclosure. Also for his enclosure, to keep the humidity in, what I do is I actually cover up the top of this guy's enclosure with tin foil. Having a barrier at the top of the enclosure, if you have a screen top, really helps keep the humidity in the enclosure instead of wafting out all the time. Just so that way this guy won't have any issues while I'm at work or just not home to constantly miss the enclosure. Now this really helps because this guy's gonna have healthier sheds. He's gonna have a much lower chance of getting something like a respiratory infection because he has the proper amount of moisture in the air. Now, another important thing to help these guys out with their humidity is to provide the right substrate for your blue-tongued skink. Now, since I have a Taliqua gigas gigas, and we're mainly gonna be talking about his species today, his substrate that I like to use is cypress mulch. So if you guys look at the cypress mulch I have, I mist it quite often, and you can actually see the moisture layers in this substrate. Now, I know for some people who live in the UK, it's kind of hard to get cypress mulch, where here in the States, it's kind of like a cheap, easy to find substrate for your tropical reptiles, including Indonesian blue-tongued skinks. So some of those guys will also use things like coconut coir, a bioactive substrate consisting of different mosses, soil, cocoa fiber, cocoa husk. All those things can be good for your blue-tongued skink. One thing that I actually really like is sphagnum moss. I think mixing sphagnum moss in along with cypress mulch really gives a nice substrate that really helps hold that humidity for a longer period of time. In the future, what I'm gonna do for this guy is I'm gonna give him a nice PVC enclosure, so that way this guy will have a ceiling top for the enclosure, whereas I want to use something like a cheap cover in order to keep the humidity from rising out of the enclosure. This is gonna make things more stable, and I'm also going to make sure that the enclosure is nice and deep so I can provide plenty of substrate for this guy, because blue-tongued skinks not only need high humidity, but they also like to burrow. So if this guy can burrow into some nice moist substrate, that'll be great for his shedding. All right guys, so moving on to the second thing that you don't wanna do with a blue-tongued skink, which also includes Panther's favorite subject, is food. So the second thing you don't wanna do with a blue-tongued skink is to overfeed these guys. These guys love food, and they're omnivores. So these guys will literally eat whatever you give them. Now that's pretty scary, because that means you can literally come home from a restaurant, put whatever you had for dinner in a bowl, and these guys will most likely just knock it down. But obviously that's not the way to feed a blue-tongued skink. So for these guys, what you want to do is you want to give them their heavy portion of food once a week. So what I'll do is I'll give my blue-tongued skink a nice healthy grain-free dog food once a week, wet food or dry food, mixed with some veggies. And throughout the week, I'll give him a few bits of fruit or a few live insects such as dubia roaches, so this guy can have a varied diet without eating too much food in 1 week. Sometimes you'll see people feeding these guys their homebrew or their dog food mixture too often. Some people will feed these guys about 3 times a week. Now, that's okay for babies because babies will eat quite often. But once your blue-tongued skink is a fully grown adult, like my 4-year-old here, this guy's only gonna eat his big heavy meal once a week. Another thing that you want to do with these guys is you want to make sure that if you're using a home brew, that you make sure you're hitting all the percentage points. Yes, I know there's a big argument there. Some people like to have the homebrew method more than they like to use a grain-free high quality dog food. Me personally, of course, if you guys have seen my videos, I like to use the high quality grain-free dog food, just like TC Houston uses. But if you're gonna use the homebrew method, you wanna make sure that your homebrew is 100% on point with all of its percentages on the veggies, protein, fat, moisture, and all the other elements that your blue tongue skink needs in order to be healthy. Calcium, phosphorus, so on and so forth. So that's the reason why I like to use a high quality grain-free dog food, because all the percentage points that you need for a blue tongue skink in a high quality grain-free dog food are already there for you. All you have to do is add the vegetable matter. So just to make things easier on yourself, guys, I would do this. But if you really want to get in the homebrew method and you really want to experiment and add a whole bunch of different ingredients in there for your blue tongue skink, you can do that too. Just make sure that you're being very anal retentive about that and that you don't miss any of the ingredients. You don't want your homebrew to be something, let's say like shredded chicken on top of romaine lettuce and call that a homebrew. That's not a homebrew. It is not going to give your blue tongue skink the proper nutritional value that it needs in order to survive and thrive in captivity. So the third subject that you want to do for these guys is make sure that you provide your blue tongue skink UVB. Now remember, whenever we're keeping a pet, especially a reptile in captivity, we want them to thrive. We don't want them to just survive. Now, have there been blue tongue skinks that have survived without UVB? Yes, probably because they were being given a calcium and vitamin D3 supplement, and they probably didn't have metabolic bone disease, just like a lot of people keep leopard geckos and some other reptiles that don't necessarily crash and burn right away from keeping UVB. But me personally, guys, because this is a diurnal species of reptile and it's out during the day and these animals do bask, I do highly suggest giving these guys UVB. Now, one mistake that some people make when they look at these guys, especially my species here, my Indonesian blue tongue skink, is that they'll look at the fact that this is a tropical animal and think, okay, well, I can give these guys a lower percentage of UVB because this guy's from the forest, right? Well, guys, keep in mind, whenever you're researching what percentage or what amount of UVB you want to provide for your reptile, you want to make sure that you know what species you have, and you want to look at the UV index of where the animal comes from. Now, guys, don't be fooled when you look at an Indonesian blue tongue skink and think, oh, well, just because it's Indonesian and because it's from a tropical forest, that this animal needs a lower percentage of UVB than its Australian cousins. What I want you guys to do is go on Google, look at the range of UV on the UV index compared to the equator, and look at where Indonesia is compared to Australia. They're not that far apart from each other. And even though these guys are living in areas where it's more tropical and their humidity is different, these guys are still going to benefit from a higher amount of UVB, just like their Australian cousins. So guys, keep in mind that even though these guys can be found in tropical rainforests and there may be only small patches of where the sun comes in through the canopy, these guys are still getting higher amounts of UVB when they do find a nice clearing in the bush to bask. All right, guys, so the fourth common mistake that people make when it comes to keeping blue tongue skinks is not providing the heat that these guys need at night. And this all depends on the temperature of your household and where you're located in the world. Now, me personally, what I like to do at night when I go to sleep is turn on the AC so the whole house cools down. But here's the thing about blue tongue skinks. These guys can tolerate a temperature drop to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit at nighttime. Now, if that temperature drops below 65 at night, well, then there's a high chance that your blue tongue skink could wind up with a respiratory infection because they got too cold. So me personally, what I like to do at night is I provide a little bit of extra heat just to make sure that my blue tongue skink isn't getting too cold at night. Definitely not as hot as is a basking spot during the daytime, but I will provide a lower wattage ceramic heat emitter at night just to make sure that this guy's not getting too cold so that way he doesn't get sick.
Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video on what not to do with your blue-tongued skink, and I hope you can take some tips from this video so that way your blue-tongued skink can live a long, healthy, happy life. So, Panther's done with his food and he's got the lizarditis, so he's getting ready to knock out and I'm getting ready to go and do my thing. So I hope everyone has a great day. Peace.